Oh, there we are. Hello, everyone, and welcome to RBCM at Home. My name is Kim Goff, and I'm a learning program developer at the Royal BC Museum. I'm coming to you today from my home, where I live as an uninvited guest on the territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, the Lekwungen-speaking people in Victoria, British Columbia. RBCM at Home started in March when our museum and archive closed due to the pandemic. It was an opportunity to talk to staff about what they were working on from home. Something for everyone in the museum sector to work on is anti-racism and inclusion. It is a time for us to reflect, learn, and fully commit to tackling discrimination, racism, and inequality in all forms. For myself, I've been embarking on a journey of self-study supported by online workshops, peer discussion, and listening to people like today's presenter. Sharanjit Kaur Sandhra is a council member at the BC Museums Association who's doing her PhD examining critical race theory and museums. She generously gave a seminar entitled Museums Are Not Neutral, and I've printed out and posted her calls to action by my desk. Sharon is a coordinator at the South Asian Studies Institute at the University of the Fraser Valley and a co-curator at the Sikh Heritage Museum. Located in Abbotsford, the museum provides the visitor with an understanding of the history of the first Sikh pioneers to migrate to British Columbia, their amazing life stories, experiences, and accomplishments, and the major role which the Khalsa Divan Society and the Gur Sikh Temple has played in such an intrinsic and colorful history. Hello, Sharon, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kim. Okay, so I'm going to put my timer on because I've got 30 minutes and I want to make sure I get through everything I want to in 30 minutes. And I'm also going to share my screen because I've got some archives that I'll be sharing as I do some storytelling.
Excellent.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you to those of you who are tuned in today. My name is Sharanjit Kaur Sandhra, or you can call me Sharan for short. And Kim's already done the introduction, so I'm not going to rehash introducing myself. Just want to acknowledge all the listeners and students who may be listening in, educators, or just community interested people. I'd also like to acknowledge that I am currently working from the unceded territory of the Stalo peoples, the people of the river. And I'd also like to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is the recent Globe and Mail article that talked about the experiences of Lucy Bell and racism at the Royal BC Museum and Archives. And I want to acknowledge that Lucy Bell, I hear you and I believe you. And I'm so happy to see that there have been people who work at the Royal BC Museum, allies who are supporting you publicly and giving that voice and truth to power, because we do know that racism exists at the Royal BC Museum and there's lots of work to be done. I also want to acknowledge that Daniel Muzica in the article, who's the board chair, said that he wasn't aware that racism exists at the Royal BC Museum. And that is certainly a problem because the non-awareness of racism at the institution is probably at the heart of what leadership is supposed to know. And so I hope that as the RBCM works towards change, that you change the language of not being aware and make it that you are aware and that you need to change that. And so Lucy, whether or not you're listening, I'm there with you in solidarity and spirit. So today I'm going to be talking about the Sikh Heritage Museum, National Historic Site, Gur Sikh Temple. Gur Sikh Temple is the official name of the Gurdwara. And Gurdwara means basically gateway to the Guru. And the Guru is the spiritual text and the knowledge that is contained within every single Gurdwara or Sikh temple space anywhere in the world. And so the official name is Gur Sikh Temple, but we refer to those sites and sacred spaces as Gurdwaras. So I'll interchange between calling it Gur Sikh Temple and a Gurdwara. So this is a modern image of the National Historic Site, Gur Sikh Temple and Sikh Heritage Museum. You'll notice that it's very different looking from most Gurdwaras that you see perhaps in Victoria or across the Lower Mainland or anywhere in the world really. In fact, of what we know of, this is the only Gurdwara or Sikh sacred space that looks the way it does in the entire world. So it's something that we're very proud of in Abbotsford as it connects to our settlement history in British Columbia. Because this Gurdwara looks the way the buildings used to look 100 plus years ago. it's a testament to those histories of 100+ years ago. Part of that is the false front that you will see. So there's a square-shaped front that you see, but the whole entire building is not necessarily shaped in that way because it has a gabled roof on the side. And so the Sikh men who were building this Gurdwara purposefully designed it. If you talk about aesthetics and building and architecture and space and power, all these kind of words collide when we look at what was the thought processes when these men were building this Gurdwara. And we may not have an exact answer through the archives, but you would think that they have a couple of things in mind. They really wanted to build a space that was for themselves, a safe space for themselves during a time when there was so much incredible overt racism. There was so much incredible discrimination and lack of access and accessibility and resources. They wanted a safe space for themselves, and not just for Sikhs. I want to make it very clear that many non-Sikhs who lived in British Columbia at this time also were in the Gurdwara spaces. There were meetings of minds and conversations that took place within these walls. So I would imagine that these men wanted to build a safe space for themselves on the inside, but also show that they are just as Canadian or giving off that settler mindset through the building of and the design of this shape that replicated many buildings 100+ years ago. And so it's like these two things coming together. You have a settler colonial building structure and style with the false front and gabled roof, but then you also have the inside space, which I'll also be showing pictures of. And I'll explain the significance of a Gurdwara and why it's designed in the way it is when we go through more archives. So the building of this space began construction in 1907, 1908. That's when the ideas began, when early Sikh settlers came in the Fraser Valley in particular. Sikh settler history really began around 1897, 1902 to British Columbia, and the reason why British Columbia was selected or chosen was because it was really the gateway through the Pacific, trans-Pacific ship travel. And so it was the easy gateway and access point for settlers who were coming from India to come to British Columbia. And also the story or the oral histories go that when early soldiers arrived in 1897, they saw the land from afar, even though they may not have stepped foot. And these soldiers were part of the Hong Kong Regiment of the British Indian Army. So in 1897, these soldiers saw the land and they realized that the land was viable and very similar to the agricultural land space that many Punjabi Sikhs would have been coming from, which is located in northwestern India. And so they went back home and told stories. And at the same time, the British Empire was trying to settle and bring settlement into Canada as well. And so there were these push and pull factors that started the flow of migration. The official Canadian census shows that 1902 was actually when Sikhs started settling. But there's a lot of other histories and oral histories that indicate there may have been Sikhs even before that living in Golden, BC. So we have to be critical of when we look at official Canadian documents and census, because they often allied those other patterns of migration that are trying to subvert and find their own pathways into this country, which in which they were considered undesirables, really. So that's a little bit about the shape of this building and the architecture and when the construction began. This is an example of early Sikh settlers in Abbotsford and in the Fraser Valley, or what we now call Abbotsford. So this image is courtesy of the Reach Gallery and Museum Archives. The caption says, Hindu, Hindoo, harvesters in Claiborne, BC, 1915. Sikh men hang off of Bateman Road. Of course, we know that Sikhs aren't Hindus, but Hindu, Hindoo, is a common verbiage and word that you will see in early 20th century documents again and again and again, because many people who are taking the snapshots, taking the picture, creating the archive, didn't know who these men were. So they often describe them as people from Hindustan. So they became Hindus when they were written about in official documents. And that became a common word that you see for decades upon decades. And it'd be really interesting to know when that switch happened, when people suddenly realized that they're not Hindus, they're Sikhs, they're Punjabis, there's a whole kind of diversity of settlers from India. But this early picture, 1915, the reason why it says Hindu harvesters, even though they're Sikh, is because of that lack of knowledge about us when we first arrived. But it's a wonderful kind of look at who these men were when they started thinking about building the Heritage Gurdwara in Abbotsford. Here's an example of just one of those men, Thakur Singh Banga, who arrived in British Columbia in 1906. So you'll see this is Thakur standing, my mouse is scrolling over it, and his wife, Dhyan Kaur Banga, and their family, their children. Thakur arrived first in 1906, and he worked for a local family, a prominent family, under the name Abbotsford Lumber Company. And so many Sikhs who arrived in the early 20th century worked within this industry, within the sawmill industry, within the lumber industry. And it was one of the biggest industries, most booming, burgeoning industries at the time in the early 20th century. And so men like Thakur worked for our own local company, Abbotsford Lumber Company. Other men, Sundar Singh Thandi, who arrived 1 year after Thakur in Abbotsford. He arrived in 1907. So Sundar Singh's family's history in Abbotsford is very interesting, and I'll talk about his wife as well. They were both known collectively as the boss and the bossney, so which is the male version and female version. And they're pretty iconic for us in Abbotsford and in our communities because they have devoted so much time and dedication to the building of that historic site in our Gurdwara, beginning in 1907. So in 1907, it was Sundar Singh Thandi, seen here working on his tractor and his farm, who first had the idea, wanting to have a safe space for themselves, wanting to build a Gurdwara for themselves. We don't know who all the men were. It wouldn't have been a very big community in Abbotsford at the time, maybe about 15, 20 men, perhaps, working for the Abbotsford Lumber Company. But it was Sundar Singh who really started the conversation. And him, Thakur Banga, and other men decided that it was time to build a Gurdwara for themselves. So what they did was collected $3,000. And you really need to pause and think, how much was $3,000 in 1907? These men were earning 10 cents an hour up at the Abbotsford Lumber Company, which was a fraction of the cost of what the white workers were earning in Abbotsford Lumber Company as well. So earning 10 cents an hour, working 12, 13-hour shifts, they somehow managed to collect around $3,000 in that time to purchase the property and to begin the process of making the Gurdwara. And so, that spirit of resiliency is in the building, and I'll explain why I argue that. This is Mohinder Kaur Thandi, one of my local icons. She's wife to Sundar Singh, and she arrived a little bit later. But the reason why I want to highlight her and emphasize what she has done is that after the Gurdwara was made in the 1940s and 50s, she became a real powerhouse and a prominent figure in our community. She was the one who donated the steps, which I will show you, and her name is etched in the front steps of that site. She is really the one who took a leadership role in our community. And like I said, she was called Bossney. People in the community called her a boss. She would drive around in her Cadillac and her fur coats, and everybody would just be in awe of this woman in the 1940s, driving around and having this powerhouse aura about her. And so she's really important to our community's history and the ongoing work and preservation of the Gur Sikh Temple and Heritage Gurdwara. This is a picture of her. I think her husband, Sundar Singh, had passed away already by then, but this is the committee member at the time. The committee at the time of the Khalsa Diwan Society, Abbotsford, which manages the Gur Sikh Temple. You'll see she's the only female amongst all these men. And it is so rare, even now, sadly, that women will have this sort of political presence within Gurdwara spaces. And so this image is much more than just an image of committee members. It's an image of Mohinder Kaur Thandi owning her place in our heritage and our history of Abbotsford. And it's really her owning and claiming her advocacy in terms of preserving this space. I want to talk, the picture's a little bit blurry, so my apologies. And once again, it's an image from the Reach Gallery Museum archives about Paul Singh Dhaliwal. another pioneer who, once the Gurdwara space was built, and I should backtrack a little bit. So the space took 3 years to be built. It started in 1907, 1908, and it officially opened in 1911. So we call ourselves the oldest still standing Gurdwara in the entire Western Hemisphere. So we call ourselves still standing because the first one officially was West 2nd Avenue, Vancouver. Unfortunately and sadly, that building was torn down. And so the physical Gurdwara no longer exists. That's why we're the oldest still standing as the second Gurdwara to be officially built, but still standing, which is wonderful. So Paul Dhaliwal arrived to Abbotsford in the 1930s. And I just wanted to share a really unique story about Paul Dhaliwal because it has to do with the Nishan Sahib. And I'll just skip to this picture first. So this is an image of our Gurdwara around the 1940s. Unfortunately, I don't think we have one that's of the time when it was built in 1911. But you'll notice this large flagpole. The flagpole is very important to any Sikh Gurdwara space. And if you were to go to any Gurdwara, even now, you'll see the flagpole. Flagpole means, it's called a Nishan Sahib. And a Nishan really means a symbol, an emblem. And that symbol is an indication that there's a Gurdwara right behind it or right nearby it somewhere. When this Gurdwara was first built, there was a wooden flag, a wooden pole, which was 80 feet high, and it had a little light bulb on it. And when you do physical tours with me at the Gurdwara, we walk around and we stop at the flagpole because the wooden stump still exists. And I stop and pause and share this story because it's a story. The story goes that the 80-foot flagpole had a light bulb. And the landscape around Abbotsford at this time was, of course, flat lands. It wasn't the way it is today with business and commercial buildings. So you could really see the flagpole from kilometers away, like such a long distance away. And we've heard oral histories and stories that Sikh settlers coming from America, so the Bellingham, Washington, Sumas border, which kind of encircles us in terms of the American borders, they would follow the light bulb on top of that original 80-foot flagpole and make their way to our Gurdwara spaces because they knew this was a place for them. And I love sharing this story because anybody who listens to it just kind of pauses and to reflect on the historicity in that moment when I share that story. So back to Paul Dhaliwal. We have been told stories that Paul Dhaliwal was a wrestler in the community. He was an athlete, huge, big guy, strong. When the light bulb would go out, so when it would get wrecked or when they needed to replace it, apparently it would be Paul Dhaliwal who would climb 80 feet up that flagpole, fix the light bulb, and come back down. So this would have been in the 1930s, before the metal flagpole, which you see now, would have been. I just love that story because it's so Paul Dhaliwal. He's passed away, unfortunately, but just that story resonates in terms of our community people, the people in our community. Here's another prominent family, and this image is actually featured in our Hakkan History exhibit, which is a partnership exhibit between the Royal BC Museum and us at the South Asian Studies Institute, which I'll talk about later as well in the 15 minutes or so, 13 minutes I have left. But this picture is a wedding picture of another prominent family in Abbotsford, the Gill family. So Inder Singh Gill, who's pictured here, I'm just hovering my mouse over it, second to the right, arrived around the 1920s as well, 1930s. And the wedding is of his son, Nash Gill, to Rajinder Kaur Gill. And their wedding pictures are some of the most iconic, beautiful images you'll see. Perhaps early images of the weddings at the Gurdwara. They're incredibly bright, they're vivid, they showcase our community. And so I always like to show these pictures in particular. And they always have to have pictures with their car behind it, because the purchase of their car, their first car, was to them one of those highlight moments of their life when they finally felt like they made it. And when you interview early Sikh settlers, they will know the first car they bought. They will know the first house they bought, because to them it was that moment of we've achieved success, we've achieved settlement, we've achieved something within our migration history. And so the wedding pictures, the car was brought purposefully so that they can pose next to their car as well. But another family that continues to support the work of the Sikh Heritage Museum, whenever we need anything, Nash is on hand to give us archives, share letters with us. And speaking of letters as well, I want to highlight that Inder Singh Gill, so the second man to the right, and Kartar Kaur, his wife, were actually separated for 17 years while he built his life and company and business here in their fuel company here in Abbotsford. And we've got those letters and we've translated those letters. And anytime you want to have a real visceral, heartfelt reaction to these histories of migration and settlement, I really encourage people to engage with us and look at those letters, because we've highlighted them in some of our exhibits in the past. It's a story of love, it's a story of partnership, it's a story of friendship, but it's also a story of separation. And part of that separation is that Sikh women didn't start arriving in British Columbia until about the 1930s, really. There was discriminatory legislation in practice that prevented women and children joining their husbands and families in the early 20th century. So those restrictive measures changed in around the 1920s. That's when women and families came to join their husbands. And that's where you really see a community forming, because as we know, without women, without families, without that solid cohesion of that power, families and communities can't form. And so really it's the 1930s, and what a great way to show that through like a wedding picture, a wedding photo as well.
Sharon, before you leave the weddings, there's a question from Jovan. He's wondering, how many weddings do you think have been held at this temple, at the Gurdwara?
I think is that Jovan, my son? So how many weddings? You know, we actually wanted to do an exhibit, and it's still in our mind, to do an exhibit of collecting only wedding pictures of the Heritage Gurdwara. So I think that's a great project and a research project to just collect stories and do a bit of a retelling of how many weddings took place. Because every time we show pictures like this, people will come up to us and say, hey, my grandparents were married there, or my so-and-so was married there. And so I think it's a great research project to look at the histories of weddings through pictures, definitely. So I don't have an exact number, unfortunately.
And Shanae is wondering if the letters you mentioned, if those are available online, or if people wanted to see them, would they be able to?
Yeah, I think parts of the letters are available through our Canada. We did an exhibit on the vote a couple of years ago. And so we did include one part of the letter as a panel piece. I'd have to look exactly where it's located, but certainly I can find it and maybe send a link to you, Kim, and then you can share it however you'd like.
Yeah, we can post that maybe along with the video on our YouTube.
Definitely. That'd be great. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the Sikh Heritage Museum. Satwinder, Baines, and myself are the co-curators, and this is a picture of us, courtesy of Tourism Abbotsford. Actually, they did a wonderful piece kind of highlighting the Heritage Gurdwara space and the museum work. So the museum, I think people get a little bit confused because we have three titles, essentially. It's a National Historic Site, it's a Gur Sikh Temple, and it's a Sikh Heritage Museum. So we very strategically use those three titles because each of those three titles are important to the work. It's a National Historic Site designated as such in 2007, and that's a federal mandated designation and title. And so it's something that went through a very rigorous application process. There was a lot of work that Satwinder and many others in the community led so that that could be designated as such. So we very proudly hold that title as National Historic Site of Canada. It's a Gur Sikh temple because it's still a fully functioning Gurdwara space in the upstairs hall, and I'll show you a picture of what that looks like when we do museum exhibits. So it's still a fully functioning Gurdwara space. People still hold functions there and still hold weddings there, actually, believe it or not. So it's still a Gur Sikh temple. And the third is a Sikh Heritage Museum. And that Sikh Heritage Museum began in 2011. That's when it officially opened, when we were celebrating the centennial of the Heritage Gurdwara. So from 1911 to 2011, it would have been the centennial in 2011. And Satwinder's idea really was to create a legacy for this underground space of the Gurdwara. Traditionally, it used to be the Langar Hall. And for those who don't know what Langar is, every Gurdwara in the world will serve you a vegetarian meal when you enter the space. And that is regardless of who you are, where you come from, your background. That space is for you, for nourishment and for spirituality. And so, of course, our Gurdwara no longer could function in that capacity as providing meals, because it was a National Historic Site, but it also didn't have the capacity given our growing community in Abbotsford. So we converted it into a Sikh Heritage Museum in 2011. I love this picture because you'll see just at the bottom where Satwinder and my kind of feet are, that step says Mohinder Kaur. And I think we find a lot of power and resiliency through Mohinder Kaur's experiences, because you've got two women, two Sikh women leading the Sikh Heritage Museum work with many incredible partnerships, including with the Reach Gallery Museum and friendships. But there's something really powerful about kind of invoking the inner Mohinder Kaur Bosni vibe when we do the work that we do together. And so grateful for my friendship with Satwinder and the work that we do together and the energy we create in that space as well. So this is a picture of one of our probably biggest museum exhibit launches. It was in 2017, and it was our exhibit on Canada 150, the story of the vote. And so from 1907 to 1947, South Asian Canadians and Sikh Canadians and many other communities, including Japanese Canadians and Chinese Canadians as well, didn't get the right to the vote. Or we had it until 1907, it was taken away from us and then given back after 40 years of real struggle and rallying. So our exhibit was about that. And you'll see a lot of people who have come from all across Canada. Actually, we've got people from Toronto who came to this exhibit opening, community members. It was just, so E from the Royal BC Museum is there as well with her kids. It was just a wonderful moment for us. But also I want to bring us back to where the picture is taken, because we try in every exhibit we do to have everybody take one picture in front of those steps, because those steps are really iconic to our history. Any wedding, any function that has taken place has always included a group picture in front of the museum steps. So we're recreating our archive still. So like 50 years from now, this will be an archive to people who are wanting to look at those histories of the museum as well. So I was talking about the upstairs space, and I really am learning and unpacking how our museum is a decolonized space. And a part of that decolonized space is that every exhibit that we have done doesn't just take us to the ground floor. We don't just sit at the Sikh Heritage Museum and go through the panels and read the history. We also go upstairs and we matha take, and everybody in the community or the Sangat comes together to hear speeches, to hear the context of the exhibit. And it's actually really beautiful. When we did our We Are Hockey exhibit opening, which is what this image is from in 2019, Harnarayan Singh, who's one of the commentators of Hockey Night in Canada Punjabi, and Randeep Janda, who's a commentator on Sportsnet, as well as Hockey Night Canada Punjabi, spoke. And they did this beautiful speech, which everybody was just charged. We were charged when we heard them talk about the Punjabi language and how important it is. And so it's decolonized because we still honor the fact that it's a fully functioning Gurdwara space. And I also want to mention, in terms of the architecture of every Gurdwara in the world, there are 4 doors that any Gurdwara in the world has. So it's north, south, east, west. And those 4 doors signify the fact that anybody from around the world, regardless of your background, is welcome to enter the Gurdwara spaces. So you don't have to ascribe to being a Sikh. You can, and when I've done tours, I've had people come in who just want to sit, and non-Sikhs who want to come in and just meditate and be in that space, and doing so by understanding that you cover your head and you remove your shoes and some of the etiquette around that. So once again, we're pushing boundaries to say, we're not going to proselytize, of course, that's anti-Sikh, but at the same time, we want you to be a part of the whole understanding of who our community is, what our community is, our heritage and our history. And this Gurdwara is very much a part of that. And being upstairs is intrinsic to that pattern of being at the Sikh Heritage Museum. And you'll see that many people wore like hockey jerseys. So they're wearing their hockey jerseys while matha taking or being upstairs. So it was really beautiful. It was a great exhibit opening as well. And that's just a shot from the ground floor. So what our exhibit looked like last year, and it's changed now. And I'm going to talk briefly in the last few minutes I have about what exhibit we have currently running. So currently we have Hakkan History at the Sikh Heritage Museum, and it's based on our partnership work with the Royal BC Museum and leaders like Tsu Chung and Janet McDonald, who've been our dear friends. I call them my sisters in crime, because you just create beautiful friendships based on this partnership work. It's based on that partnership work, which I think Liz will be showing the portal that has been created as one of the small parts of an output. But Hakkan History, or Hak Ate Itihas, which it is in Punjabi, is about rights. So Hak, the Punjabi word, means rights. And merging those two words together, rights and history, is exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about our right to our history in this province, our right to our shared solidarity with other racialized people in British Columbia, our rights to showcase those histories in dominant white spaces so that people understand these stories and these nuances. It's a beautiful exhibit, something we're very proud of. I'm going to end by showing an image of Rajinder Singh Gill. So Rajinder is a local Abbotsford settler as well. His family arrived in the early 1940s. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. But the really cool thing about Rajinder Uncle Ji is that his great uncle was a passenger on the Komagata Maru. So Jeevan Singh was his grandpa, or great uncle. He was aboard the passengers on the Komagata Maru. They stood here for 3 months waiting for an opportunity to arrive, and they were denied access. I know I'm done. I'm almost done. So Rajinder is really important because he traveled from Abbotsford to Victoria to see this exhibit at the RBCM when it launched at the Pocket Gallery. Rajinder Gill came because that's his picture down below with his dad. Rajinder Gill came because anytime we call him, he will be in our office with images, archives, stories, and tears. And through those tears, he will happily share the experiences of him and his family. Rajinder Gill was there last week when he congratulated us on getting a $1.14 million grant from the provincial government, and he came just to congratulate us. People like Rajinder Gill are there for our community, are there to help figure out how to showcase these stories. And that is why the Sikh Heritage Museum and the work that we do is so important. It's so critical that we engage with many different communities and create those solidarities and partnerships. And so if you are in the local Fraser Valley area, please do visit the Sikh Heritage Museum. It's open 7 days a week from about 9:30 to 4:30. Anybody is welcome. And this is the current exhibit that's up. It's in 2 languages, which is beautiful, English and Punjabi. And I really encourage people to, take part. That's my spiel.
Thank you, Sharon. I'll get you to stop sharing your screen so folks can see you. We've got some great questions here in the Q&A. The last one's from Isaiah. He says he feels very privileged to be able to see the space and given the opportunity to learn about this beautiful history of resiliency and love. And he's asking, what can we do to promote and uphold the beauty and prestige of this sacred place? And I'm wondering if maybe there's going to be some opportunities with that grant you mentioned.
Oh, good one. Yeah. I think the power of sharing and storytelling is so important. Like today, all I did was share stories. Like I didn't have notes. I didn't have a speech ready for you. I just looked at the picture and I shared a story about that picture. And so I think what you first need to do is see what position you have. Do you have a position where you have a circle of people that you can potentially teach and influence? And can you, by sharing the story of the Heritage Gurdwara, change people's perceptions and allow people to see that space. Because I understand when I do tours, people are hesitant because they don't know, can they come in? What is the etiquette? And I totally understand that. So it's overcoming those boundaries that we inherently build in ourselves to enter those spaces fully and freely. So if there's one thing you could do is look at your spheres of influence around you and just share that this space exists and it's here for you. It's here for the entire community. Thanks, Isaiah. Yeah.
A question, earlier question came along when you were talking about Paul Dollywall, and Galvin was wondering, do you know when Paul passed away?
That's my son. Got the whole family in on this. Paul passed away, I think it was 2014. So about 6 years ago. And he was more than 100 years old. So he had celebrated his centennial birthday. And I think he passed away at 101. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Now, I think the quiz questions from your sons are over. Anit is wondering, what was the response of the wider community to the Sikh weddings that were taking place in the Gurdwaras? Or at the Gurdwara?
Well, there were actually, I think there are pictures where there are non-Sikhs at these weddings as well. So I think there was just a shared sense of community, but not to nostalgize it as well. I don't know if there was racism as a result to kind of the orientalizing of what are these people doing and dressing funny, and I don't know. I haven't seen archives like that. I do know that if we talk about even cremations, for example, so like in the early 20th century, and this doesn't really have anything to do with the Gurdwara, but in terms of the white gaze, when cremations happened, Sikhs and other South Asians had to do it in the open forest because we had no cremation space for ourselves, and we don't bury, right? We cremate. Or Hindus and Sikhs do, Muslims do bury. So there was a lot of weird, there's a lot of racism and vitriol around what are these freaks doing, right? Cremating. And so that's part of that not knowing and orientalizing and freakishizing people who are not like you or aren't white-centeredness. So I know definitely around cremations, there was a lot of racism. I don't know what the reactions were to weddings, but I do know there were many non-Sikhs in Abbotsford and otherwise who attended these weddings and are in portraits, family pictures as well.
As you say, I think maybe that exhibit on weddings could be really interesting, engaging.
Yeah, it seems like people really like that.
Yeah. Harkiat Singh says, in the UK, he's been involved in digitizing old Gurbani kirtan that have been used to be recorded on spools and tapes. Do you have any access to these old recordings or images of visiting Kirtanese to Abbotsford?
Oh, that's such a great question.
Is the kirtan, to clarify for folks who don't know, is that music?
Yes, so Kirtan is a singing of the shabads that are contained within the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, which is the core text of the Sikh faith. So the Guru Granth Sahib Ji is what we bow down to when we enter a Gurdwara space. If anybody has ever been to a Gurdwara, the first thing you do is bow. You're not bowing to a person or an embodiment of a Guru. What you're bowing down to is the knowledge and the beauty and the Gurbani and the poetry in song form. So Kirtan is essentially a singing of the hymns in the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. That's a really great question. And I haven't come across anything actually, because, even the recording, even the capacity to collect archives is a privileged position, right? Like to even have a camera in the 1930s or 40s, it was very privileged white people who even had cameras and could take pictures and historicize their own histories. So I think having a audio recording, it may have happened, but perhaps in the 70s and 80s onwards, which is still incredibly valuable. So perhaps somebody will hear this and come to us with recordings, but I haven't come across any, no.
Excellent. One last question, and I think this is from Shanae, and Shanae, I think I might take this question and use it all the time because it's such a great question. Shanae asks, what's one of the most important things you've learned from your work?
Oh, Shanae. I have to tell you, I've changed so much in a matter of 6 months. So forget even what we've been doing in 10 years since we've been doing our Heritage Gurdwara work. the inner fire, the inner charge, the inner excitement that I felt in a matter of 6 months is unlike anything I've ever experienced in my life. And I think one thing I feel truly is hope, right? I went from a place of anger, which is justified. My anger is justified at friends and colleagues who I thought were a part of the problem. And now I've come to a place of hope that through the work we are doing and through calling out and naming the issues that museums have, there are people and professionals who are so desperate and want to be our allies and change. And so I have incredible hope that this will happen. And if that's the one thing that I've learned, I think it's a positive thing. And I hope that it does happen.
I hope so too. I really do. Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah.
Lots of comments here. People thanking you. Looking forward to visiting the museum, not having been aware of it before, and so that's so great. And I hope many people do visit this very, very special
me too.
place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So everyone, thank you. If you joined us late or you missed something, or again, if you want to share with someone else, this has been recorded and you'll find it in the next day or so on the Royal BC Museum's YouTube channel. So please have a look there. We have reopened and we are ready to welcome people back. You can find out more on our website about time tickets and exhibits. We are going to be continuing this series at home kids and at outside for the foreseeable future. And links for all these programs are posted on the Royal BC Museum's website. If there's a museum, community group, or cultural site you would like us to visit and chat to, please let us know. You can put that in the chat window or feel free to get in touch with us by email. Next week, I'll be talking with my colleague, Chris O'Connor, and with two people who've made submissions and contributions to the Royal BC Museum's COVID Collecting Project, which aims to document the pandemic. I hope you'll join us then, and in the meantime, take care of yourselves and one another. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.